Okay, if we could get started, I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of the Manitou Springs City Council for November the 1st, 2022. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. You'll all join me. We know. Well, it's a have been had moment. Yeah.
Where you there's 21 feet.
Oh, yeah, like this. You did not see your app. So, I agree.
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Would the city clerk please call the roll?
City Council members Judith Chandler,
Present.
Julie Wolfe,
Here.
Natalie Johnson. Here. Nancy Fortune.
Present.
Michelle Weatherholt.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem John Chada. Is to be absent. And Mayor John Graham.
Present, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, council, you've all had a chance to look at the agenda. I would have a call for a motion to approve the agenda.
I move we approve the agenda.
We have a second.
Second.
Judy, how do you want us to vote, electronically or by hand? Okay, by hand and by voice. Okay, all in favor, say aye. Okay, motion passes. Thank you. The agenda is approved. And now we come to public comment on non-agenda items. So this is a time when anyone in the audience can speak for up to 3 minutes about any subject that is not part of tonight's agenda. Judy, have we had anyone indicate that they wanted to speak? Is there anyone in the audience who wants to speak? Apparently not. All right, we'll push on then. The next item is the consent calendar. We just have 2 items on the consent calendar tonight. First is approval of the city council regular meeting minutes for October the 4th, 2022 as amended. And the second, approval of city council regular meeting minutes for October the 18th, 2022.
I'll move to approve the consent calendar items F1 and F2 as presented.
Motion, do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Any further discussion? If not, let's go ahead and vote. Judy, do you want us to do this voice or, okay, electronically? Please vote.
We have a 6-0 vote in favor.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay. And we have 2 presentations tonight. The first is a proclamation number 2222, a proclamation recognizing November the 10th, 2022 as International Accountants Day and recognizing City of Manitou Springs Finance Department staff. And Counselor Johnson has volunteered to read that.
City of Manitou Springs Proclamation number 2222. Proclamation November 10th, 2022 International Accountants Day and recognizing City of Manitou Springs Finance Department staff. Whereas the history of accounting as an established practice dates back several millennia and is vital to business success. And whereas the field of accounting has undeniably developed significantly since its introduction in pre-modern times and has experienced robust advancements throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance period. And whereas International Accounting Day is celebrated on the anniversary of the publication of the critical work in the 15th century by Italian mathematician Luca Bartolomeo di Pacioli, also known as the father of accounting. And whereas the city's finance department provides accounting, financial administration and reporting, budgeting, investment, billing, accounts receivable, accounts payable, and payroll services for the city of Manitou Springs. And whereas the finance department staff is privy to the most intimate details of the city and have access to facts and figures we could never collectively understand. And whereas it is most appropriate that we recognize the importance of our finance department staff as they play a critical role in providing accurate and timely information to the city administrator and council so that sound business decisions can be made on behalf of the city and its citizens. Now therefore, I, John G. Graham, Mayor of the City of Manitou Springs, Colorado, do hereby formally recognize the City of Manitou Springs Finance Department staff and accordingly hereby declare November 10th, 2022 as International Accountants Day, adopted this first day of November 2022 in the City of Manitou Springs, El Paso County, Colorado.
Thanks, Natalie. And Judy, would you note that Mayor Pro Tem Shada joined the meeting at 6:08? Thank you. And we have our finance director with us tonight, Becca Davis. Becca, would you like to say anything at being International Accountants Day? Not today, but on the 10th.
Thank you for acknowledging the importance of accountants and the finance department. Thank you.
Thank you, and extend our appreciation to your staff as well. It's budget season, so it's an important time. Okay, thank you. Okay, next item is Manitou and Pikes Peak Cog Railway Tax Incentive Program Agreement Reimbursement. And let me first provide a little bit of background. There was interest during budget discussions, interest by some council members to take a closer look at the agreement. So this seems to be a good thing to do. Tonight's a presentation, so it's an opportunity for us to get the facts. We will be doing budget work 2 weeks from tonight on the 15th. That'll be the first reading of the budget ordinance. So it's probably good that we get some of this, have an opportunity to think about some of this and ask questions and so forth. Let us mull it over. There's 9 documents in the council packets. There's quite a bit of material to go over potentially. With that said, again, tonight is basically just a presentation. We won't be taking action other than if we have follow-on questions, we would be directing staff to get more information so that we can have that available by the time we hit the budget again. So with that, Becca, it's yours.
Good evening. City Council asked for the facts related to the COG Railway Tax Incentive Agreement to date. Now, I was not a participant in the discussions, but have researched the city records and provided the documents that I was able to locate in this packet. So please note, we have not reached out to COG personnel to be part of this presentation. We have received an email from Gary Pearson that due to a death in the family, he could not be here in the audience tonight. So the essential facts of the COG Railway Tax Incentive Agreement is that the COG train closed in winter of 2017 and did not reopen in 2018 due to needing repairs and replacements. Then the first 50-year agreement was approved on 6/26/2018. And this was between the city and the COG. It was repealed on 11/20/2018. And then a second 50-year agreement was approved 5-2 on 11/28/2018, which was right after the first agreement was repealed. So the main provisions of the agreement, I'm just going to be very high level here. There is a lot of pages to it, but the main provisions included payments to the city totaling $1,250,000 in the first 3 years of 2018 through 2020. And then for use tax, the total use tax paid from 2018 through 2021 was refunded. And then after that, only the rolling stock use tax will be refunded. And that's from 2022 to 2041. And then finally, the excise tax. For 2021 through 2070, it will be refunded the amount that will be refunded will be the amount over Exhibit A, the base tax for the various years. And also the tax generated by the ridership over 375,000 riders in any calendar year is not subject to reimbursement. And finally, I thought I would mention one other little segment was that for the years 26 through 50, the city shall reimburse the lesser of the amount over the Exhibit A base amount or the amount of excise tax in excess of 3.8% of the owner revenue subject to excise tax. Oops. Okay, so this is a summary of Exhibit A. Now, for the first 25 years, the base is increased by 1.5% to 2.5% every 4 years. And then in year 26, it increases by 14.86%. That's that 650,000 for the years 2047 through 2052. And then for the remaining years, the increases range from 3.34% to 7.41%. Yes, I did the math. Now, the refunds that have been paid to the Cog Railway so far. In 2021, the excise tax remitted to the city was a total of 862,171. And per Exhibit A, the city was keeping a base amount of 507,500, which meant that 354,607 was reimbursed or refunded to the COG. So now that I have some data, I can estimate that it looks like in 2022, we will be refunding approximately 600,000. And I kept 2023 flat to 2022. So once again, it's another 600,000 for that year. And I have not tried to estimate any further than that. Now for the use tax, there was 2,520 reimbursed in 2019. And then in 2021, 165,827. And then the 2022 to 2041, once again, we'll be refunding the rolling stock use tax. And at this point, we have no idea when that'll occur, if that'll occur. So per the report that the COG filed with the Colorado Public Utilities Commission for 2021, which is part of your packet, it's the second to the last document. The ridership in 2021 was 273,384, and the passenger revenues were 17,262,208. This averages out to a ticket price of $63.14. So using that as my amount to calculate with, I've come up with a ridership for 2022, assuming the 600,000 is correct, of approximately 350,800 riders, which will be less than that 375,000 by approximately 24,000. So looking at the documents that I discovered, there were some assumptions that I thought I would include here, and I included it also in the memo. And there was the backup paper for that first ordinance, 1318, that was the first ordinance. There was an attachment 4, which had a maximum ticket price of $40, and attachment 5, which had a maximum ticket price of $55. Now, after this was approved in September, late September, the city sought an outside opinion from Summit Economics, And that opinion letter is the last document that is attached to my section of the packet. And in there on the page, it was said conclusion. That was close to the last page. It said the average, they were assuming the average ticket price would be $32. And that with an average inflation rate of 2% over the next 25 years and ridership of 400,000, the COG would be reimbursed an average of 295,000 per year. And then I went online and onto the COG's website and got their ticket rates and yesterday. And I did a cut and paste, and that's the prices there. Unfortunately, the font is really small. So the smallest amount is $48.50. And then the highest amount is under that walk-up call-in rates is the adult reserved admission of $71. Once again, I apologize for the tiny font. Now, I just want to say, please note, this presentation is just the facts that I was able to locate in city and state documents and is in no way meant to imply any kind of a legal opinion. It's just what I found. It's just the facts. And then finally, is there any additional information City Council needs concerning this matter?
Council, I think this is an opportunity if we have financial questions to ask Becca. I think at some point in the discussion, we would ask Mr. Parker to to respond to legal questions. So if we could go ahead and if we have questions for Becca, this would be the time to do it. Anyone? Let's see, I think we have Nancy, then John, and then Judith. Okay, Nancy?
Thanks, Becca. I think it's paragraph 15 of the agreement says, in the event that appropriation of sufficient funds is not made in any year resulting in the inability of the city to pay its excess excise tax, any other reimbursements under section 5 of this agreement or reimbursed tax thereunder, the city shall not be obligated to pay payment of the non-appropriate amounts in such year. What is the definition in this case of inability of the city to pay? And that might be a legal question versus.
That sounds like a legal question.
So, okay, so I think that is much better to give legal advice in an executive session to city council and not go on the record with any legal conclusions regarding this. So if the city council wants to have, I think, an in-depth legal conversation, I'd recommend we do that in an executive session and not have a legal discussion on the record. But ultimately, it basically, the way, just to sort of answer that question, it basically says when there is not an appropriation of sufficient funds resulting in the inability to pay. So if you don't appropriate sufficient funds, you can't pay. It isn't, that's what the definition is of the inability to pay is a non-appropriation that results in the inability to pay.
Can I ask my second question?
Go ahead.
And that is paragraph 15 or paragraph 23 talks about dispute resolution. And my sense is that this has the potential to be a dispute. And I'm just wondering what we have done or should do in support of this paragraph.
So, I mean, so right now, I just have a presentation on your agenda about the agreement. So I don't think there's any dispute right now. I think there's just a conversation about what the agreement means, what the payment obligations are, how the reimbursement works. If there is a dispute over something regarding payments, then this section would govern. And what it generally requires is that the parties mediate a dispute first before resulting to the judicial system.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think, John, you were next.
I think for section 15, before the sentence that is before the one that Nancy read, and I'd like to read that in the record. It says, notwithstanding anything in this agreement to the contrary, this agreement is specifically subject to annual appropriation by the city of sufficient funds to pay the excess excise tax, and any other reimbursements under section 5 of the agreement or use taxes reimbursed by this agreement. And then Nancy read the last sentence. So I guess I wanted to underscore that the wording in the agreement says annual appropriation. And that's just sort of kind of a comment on what's going on in section 16. I really appreciated Becca's research, and there was a lot of great documents that, of course, I have in my archives, but you picked some very good ones to kind of put in the packet. So I appreciate that. One of the things that's a public record, as you noticed, is that DR, PUC form that divulges a lot of financial information about railroads that are operating in the state. And one of the comments I wanted to make was that, second here. Those spreadsheets that, you showed a kind of a snapshot of, I took this weekend and reverse engineered them so that basically I could poke in the numbers and see whether everything was kind of correct. And one of the things that's rather interesting that jumped out to me was that in 2022, okay, depending upon those parameters that you put in there, whether it was, I think you called it attachment 4 or 5, correct? Okay. For 2022, the model only showed a reimbursement of $32,000. And we have reimbursed 10 times that amount. So that's an interesting thing. The other thing too is on Becca's slide, she had all the rates, okay? And that always kind of befuddled Buddy Morrison and I in terms of how we would figure out, because there's nothing in those PUC documents that show how many tickets they sell in any one of those categories. But very fortunately, there are gross revenues in there and the number of passengers. And so using fairly simple math, you can kind of figure it out. So as an example, for 2021, according to the PUC records using that math, the average ticket price was $63.14. So maybe that will help inform you in terms of, because otherwise that slide of Becca's of the laundry list of rates, and I'm sure there are even bigger rates than that, which would be, if you have a tour bus, what I mean? I'm sure they, negotiate lots of different rates per person depending upon, their business needs. But overall, if you take their revenues that are tied only to passenger revenues, not the gift shop, not the parking enterprise, okay, not maybe anything else that wouldn't fit into passenger revenues, it's $63.14. So those are my comments. Thank you so much for that packet, though.
Thank you, John. Judith?
Thank you. One of my questions has already been answered, and I appreciate that. And thank you again. And it's accounting month, and I don't know what we would do without you. So I just wanted to say that. Per the agreement, I came onto council in 2020. Can you tell me if the payments of 500,000 in 2018 and 2019 and the 250,000 in 2020 were paid?
Yes, they were.
They were. Thank you.
Julie?
I just wanted clarification, Jeff, but if this is an executive session response, I'm sure you'll tell me. I just want to confirm the reading of the two sentences from paragraph 15 of the agreement. And Nancy had some questions about, it says, well, if we can't pay, what does that mean if we can't pay? Am I reading paragraph 15 correctly to say that the council is required to determine whether to provide this rebate, if you want to call it that, And if council chooses to provide zero of the rebate, then the council would be, as it's worded in the agreement, unable to pay. Or the city would be unable to pay because the city is only able to pay legally when council votes, yes, we're going to pay. Am
Yeah.
I interpreting that correctly?
Well, so the law requires that, Colorado law requires that all expenditures by a government entity like the city be appropriated, budgeted for and appropriated. So if they're not appropriated, you can't make the expenditure. So under Colorado budget law, if you don't appropriate the funds, then you aren't able to pay legally.
Okay, so when it said inability to pay, it doesn't mean that the city's going bankrupt and we're unable to pay because we're just too broke to pay. It means we voted no, let's not give the rebate this year. Is that, am I
That's how I
simplifying that
read that. provision.
correctly? Okay, my other comment is, and because one of the attachments in our packet, and I don't know offhand which one it was, it indicated something about how the amount that the city is allowed to keep. And it showed the $507,000. That's not correct. The city's allowed to keep the entire amount. The city is allowed to decide we're going to keep all of it, or the city's allowed to decide we're going to keep some of it, or the city's allowed to decide we're going to appropriate the entire amount. And that's just an annual thing we have to vote on. Is that simplification accurate? Or that summary?
Yeah, I guess I don't want to really comment too much on what the staff memo meant and the use of the word allowed. And I think that ultimately, the agreement's subject to annual appropriation. To spend funds, you have to appropriate them. If funds aren't appropriated, they can't be spent. So I think the use of the word allowed is maybe just meant to be pursuant to the agreement. It's done in these circumstances, not allowed or not. I don't think it was meant to be a legal conclusion in the staff memo.
And then the language that talks about how the city will have no liability if the council decides not to do the rebate. Isn't that a common clause that's in a lot of contracts?
So, yeah, so the section 15 is basically sort of your standard. There's different versions of this. There's a ton, infinite number of ways to write this sort of clause, but it's sort of your typical Tabor non-appropriation clause, because under Tabor, you can't, local governments generally can't enter into multi-fiscal year obligations. So an obligation that extends beyond the current fiscal year, unless it's subject to annual appropriation. Because without taking a vote, I should say, if you have a vote of the people, then you can enter into agreements that last longer than a fiscal year. But if you don't have a vote, then you have to have your obligations generally subject to annual appropriation. So this is the type of clause you'll see in agreements that have payments that extend beyond a fiscal year, but they have to be subject to appropriation or they violate Tabor. So without that clause, this agreement would have violated Tabor without a vote.
Right, and so there's been suggestion in the memo or somewhere in the packet that, oh, if we decide we're not going to appropriate every penny, if we appropriate $1 less than what the math shows or nothing or whatever, we could be sued. Maybe this is an answer you want to use for executive session. I don't know. But to me, when I read something that says really clearly there's no liability, doesn't no liability means you don't get sued for these things? It's up to you. Or can you define no liability for these people?
First of all, anybody can sue you for anything. The real question is it a valid lawsuit? And can you win? Right. And, saying there's no liability doesn't mean there's no liability. And I would want to argue in this case that there's no liability. That's what it means. But, as anybody who's a lawyer, Councilmember Wolf, there's nuances to everything. There's pros and cons, and people can bring claims that you may not expect. There's all kinds of arguments, but that provision is there for a reason. It's to comply with Tabor. Otherwise, the agreement would have not been legal under Tabor. And the way I read that provision is that it's subject to annual appropriation.
But it's there to comply with Tabor, but am I correct? It's also there to put the other party to the agreement on notice that this is subject to annual appropriations, just like the Holiday Inn, just like the URA, just like the contract we passed in the consent calendar 2 weeks ago. It's also to notify the other party. It's not just to comply with Tabor,
Well,
right?
yeah, I mean, it's really more than just notifying the other party is agreeing to it. And so, anybody is presumed to understand the terms of the agreement that they're signing. A sophisticated party is certainly presumed to understand it. So I think that, not only is it a notification, it's an agreement. So both sides agree to it.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Council, what I might suggest is, at present, our schedule is to address the budget with first reading 2 weeks from tonight, November the 15th. And then currently second reading is scheduled for December the 6th. And we have a hard date of having to get the budget done by December the 15th. Now we've got several options and we can always go in and amend the budget as needed. What I might suggest is I think we're getting to an area here where Mr. Parker would be more comfortable responding in executive session, and probably we should all be more comfortable. Maybe if we were to meet earlier on the 15th, start at 5, or Michelle, maybe 5:15. I think it depends kind of on your work schedule. I think you have the constraint. Maybe we could have a 45-minute or an hour-long work session or executive session, and Mr. Parker could respond to some of our concerns and provide a little guidance. So that would be an option. And in that case, we could just, get back to some of the financial details that maybe Becca has for us. No, November 15th. Yeah. Natalie?
I'm just wondering, Becca, when do we typically pay the reimbursement?
Per the agreement, the reimbursement has to be paid before the end of March of the year after the
Next year?
use. Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm just wondering if we'll be able to have the conversation we need to have on the 15th. So it's good to know we might have more time.
Right. Yeah, I guess that was my point, because really, if we were to go ahead and pass the budget in the way it's going to be presented in a couple of weeks, which we've already looked at that pretty closely, we could get through all the deadlines and comply with the state law, and still come back whenever felt we needed to discuss this. So I guess my point is we should try to do things right, not necessarily do them quickly, and probably have legal advice.
I have
as
a
would be
question,
appropriate.
Mayor.
Yeah.
May I? It's really a question for Jeff, but, and it pertains to the good point that Natalie just made is, it seems to me that what we may want to do is vote when we appropriate, or, when we vote on the budget, and to the extent to which this would be part of it, that this part of the budget would be approved, or whatever we all vote on, subject to the actual numbers, so that we wouldn't really authorize a check to be issued back to the COG in any specific dollar amount, even after the budget is approved, until we know at the end of December or sometime in January what the actual taxes were that we collected, and then do the final math, so that we would approve it. But it would be subject to whether it's a subsequent resolution or something by council approving the specific dollar amount, because all we can do now is approve an estimate. Would that be legal to have some kind of a caveat like that says we're approving this now, but the check won't be issued until we see the final numbers and we vote?
Yeah, I want to give it a little more thought and not just wing it here, but ultimately, I think, it's the only justification for non-payment is a non-appropriation. And so I think if you tried to do an appropriation with a condition on it, that would probably be treated as a non-appropriation until you did another appropriation in 2023 before March. I don't think you can do a conditional appropriation that might or might not be effective for your December 15th budget for 2023. That's my quick answer on that. So I think that'll probably be treated as not appropriating the funds, because they still would need to be appropriated when you know the numbers. That makes sense. I don't think
It'd be appropriate when we know the numbers. We won't know the numbers until next year, but we have to submit the budget this year. That's why I didn't know.
Yeah, I think what you have to do is you have to appropriate the fund, like do a amended appropriation. And
I see.
I want to look at that one. That's a little unusual. And I'm trying to wing an answer here, which always makes me nervous. So let me take a look at it and get back to you on
Okay.
that one.
Okay, it sounds like we could, it's doable one way or another. My interest is that we don't just come up with a number and we estimate it and it turns out, it should have been much higher, it should have been much lower. I'd like to know the actual amount of the check that should be written based on our vote, but it sounds like we could always just have a meeting to revise. I don't know if that would take first and second reading. If we had a revised 2023 budget based on this one item only next year before
Yeah.
March.
You would probably be doing it by ordinance, so it typically would take 2 readings.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Shada.
Jeff, on that note, almost the entire budget are estimates for
Right,
each department, right?
right.
And so isn't the way the law reads, or just convention or whatever, that this gives staff the authority to cut a check up to and including that amount?
That's right.
Okay, but it doesn't mean that if the amount, so I think what Becca tends to do is tends to be conservative on the income side, okay? And pessimistic on the expense side, right? Okay, that's the experience I have with you. And so, so I think the only scenario that is of big worry is if for some reason the COG had much more revenue, and grinding out the formula would mean that our appropriation is too low. Then I assume staff would come back to us and say, hey, the numbers don't look like this. And coincidentally, that's in March. In my experience with that, what is it, DR 1502 form or whatever the heck that is, I mean, that you included, the department.
Yeah, that was filed in April.
Yeah, exactly. And that's typically when they file it, when you look at all those dates, because I have a little tickler in my calendar to go look, not any earlier, because I've realized they don't file it earlier. So. Okay, that's all. I just wanted to refresh my memory about how we usually, the appropriations work. It's up to and including that amount is what we are giving staff authority to do. And I think we could put conditions on any one of those budget items, could we not, in terms of?
Well, if it goes over the appropriated amount, then you have to come back to you and get a new appropriation. If it goes under the appropriated amount, then.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, I remember being on council in really lean years. And sometimes we went through and said, you know what? We don't want to see these appropriations here until the second part of the year, until we really see how things are coming in. And so I think we can give sort of kind of direction in terms of when things are appropriated and stuff like that, sort of kind of a framework, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, so I want to make sure that we're not just looking at one box or the other. There's the budget law box, how you
Right.
appropriate. There's the contract box for
Right.
what's a valid reason to
Right,
not make a payment.
right,
And so you need to make sure that if there's not going to be a payment, that you haven't appropriated the funds, right? Because that's the only reason why you can't make a payment.
right.
And so I think you'd have to basically, if the funds are not appropriated, then that's the reason why a payment can't be made. So I think that you wouldn't want to somehow have a appropriation and then take it back or change it. I want to make sure that if you're thinking about doing this, you have to think about how the appropriation is done.
So it would seem like to me, the safest control thing that one could do is appropriate nothing and amend the budget to have the actual amount at the time it comes in.
Yeah, you have to do a new appropriation and a new budget.
Right. Well, I mean, you would have to amend the budget by ordinance, right?
Right.
Okay, and we do that all the time.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Judith, did I see your hand up or?
Oh, I just wanted to make sure, are we or are we not doing an executive session then on the 15th? I was a little confused about
Okay,
that. Do
and
we-
I
is
put
still-
that out there. We haven't
Okay.
I-
thank you. We
actually,
haven't
I-
gotten that far.
We haven't gotten that far, but actually,
thank you.
let's go ahead and just run around the table here. First off, so what I was suggesting is that we have an executive session to discuss this with Mr. Parker. And then we start early on the evening of the November 15th, like 5 o'clock, or Michelle, I'm not sure when you get off work. Is it, would 5:15 be better?
5:15 would be better, but I could be here at 5 if
Okay.
need be.
Then Mr. Parker, would you be able to be okay? So we could do, okay, so that's doable. Let's go around the table and see if that's what council's pleasure is. Julie?
Yeah, I could be here at 5 or 5:15, whatever you decide is fine.
Okay.
That works for me.
John's nodding. Works for me. Nancy, okay. All right, so we're good. So let's plan on having an executive session at 5:15 on November the 15th. And Mr. Parker, if you'll provide the appropriate wording, so we do that.
Yep.
Okay, so some of our questions will be asked then or possibly answered then. Do we have additional questions for Beck at this time? I don't
I have
s-
an additional question for Becca.
Okay, Julie?
Is there any harm in given the fact that this is all an estimate, how much we owe them, and the fact that you're allowed to write them a check up to that amount, even if it turns out that under the contract, we owe them quite a bit less, that bothers me. So what about that solution that was just mentioned when we have, can he go outside so that? Anyway, I think, is there any harm to the budget indicating that we're reimbursing zero at this time and then simply come back once you've gotten the year-end numbers for 2022 and come back prior to March and actually show us the math and so we can vote on the correct dollar amount? Is there any harm in doing it that way?
Well, you can reappropriate
I know.
anytime you want. So I feel like it's a legal thing to say, is there any harm? It's,
Oh, well, then maybe I'm asking the wrong person. Jeff, is there any harm if we put in zero now and we just appropriate, once we get the dollar?
I think the
tax
question
in?
about, like, is there any legal reason why you couldn't do that under the budget law? No,
Yeah.
No.
That'd be fine.
Okay.
Okay, that's all I want to know.
right.
Thanks.
I guess I'd like to make the comment that, in part, I think we're all concerned with what's going to happen a week from tonight when we hear how the marijuana vote goes in Colorado Springs. That'll affect our budget. And I think that's been a concern that we've had since our first day-long meeting in March. And I think that's largely why I wanted to do some of this tonight, that we could get some of the background material and Becca, thank you. We've got 9 documents. There's quite a bit of material there to pour through and assimilate and whatnot. But we still have some time to think about this. And do we need to do this right now? We're fairly flush. We have a lot of things a lot of projects that need to be addressed. So there's a concern there. And I think there's also the matter that we did, or our the previous council had dealt with the COG and had negotiated this. And I think there's a certain element of good faith. And we want to take that into consideration. I think we need to, honor our handshakes. So, that's another thing that adds a certain element of interest to this whole process. So I think I will mention that I was contacted yesterday by Gary Pearson of the COG Railway. He was a little upset to hear about this. Denise, or Becca, actually, you had reached out to Ted Johnston, who's the general manager of the COG Railway, and gave him notice several weeks ago. So I don't think that should have come as a surprise to Gary. But I do think he would like to have the opportunity to come down and talk about this matter with us. So we can probably expect to see him here, at some point, possibly on the 15th. Certainly if we do the second reading as scheduled on December the 6th. So there's a few other things here that make this a more complicated picture. Council, anything else on this topic?
I have something.
Julie?
Just in response to what you said, and I don't know if I understand this correctly, because this is all kind of new. But if I understood correctly, that when this agreement was entered into, the COG was anticipating getting a much smaller rebate because they were anticipating charging a much smaller amount per ticket than they ended up charging, then that's quite a windfall to be discussed for all of us. Because if you're talking about good faith and we all kind of expected that probably council would vote yes no matter what. Well, that might be true, but council wasn't expecting that they were going to increase their ticket prices so dramatically, for example, which increases the amount of their rebates. So there's another side of the story of what you just said. I don't want to engage, I understand in a big argument or debate about it at this time, but there is that counter. That was not an expectation when this was signed, that
Nope.
they would suddenly raise their prices so much and give us all this extra tax that we weren't expecting and get this huge rebate. So there's different things for us to discuss other than just a good faith handshake.
No, I understand. That's a good point because I remember being at one of those city council meetings and I think Gary was talking about $28 for a ticket. Yeah, I paid $68 last year, so that was a little bit of a difference. So, but I get that. But I mean, so this is not going to be an easy topic necessarily. So just want to bring that up. Nancy.
Whereas we're not in a dispute, I would prefer not to get into a dispute. And hence it would seem that there would be some reason to have discussions outside of city council meetings, just to see what the COG's thoughts are on all of this. I would propose that perhaps someone on staff or someone on staff and the mayor could sit down with Ted or Gary ahead of time to kind of get a feel for what their thoughts are on all of this. So that would be my proposal.
And I object to that because Nancy always wants to meet with people before we get our legal advice. And generally speaking, that doesn't work out well. I would prefer we understand our legal rights and obligations and risks and then engage in asking them and responding to them, because there's no point in asking. I think that's backwards.
I guess my druthers would be to wait till the 15th to have a discussion in executive session, and that's what we have our attorney for. Nancy, I think the idea of meeting and talking things over is a good one. It seems to me like that could happen after we've had some legal advice.
And that's fine. I have no problem with that. I just don't want to have an open session in council that I would just prefer to preclude disputes if we can. And it seems like communication sooner rather than later would lend us to having a more successful outcome. Additionally, the contract in 2 or 3 places calls for discussion and emphasizes the importance of relationships. And I think relationships are very important in this regard. So thanks.
Okay. Julie, if let's suppose we go ahead and we have our executive session on the 15th of November, and then perhaps based on that, it would be appropriate for staff and myself to meet with Gary or Ted or something like that. Would you be okay to think about it that time?
I don't think that's a good idea, because if you meet with Gary and you give him the impression different from how the rest of council votes, he's going to be furious. I think it's much more logical for us to present as a united front on how we feel, or do our vote, or do whatever, or have a discussion as a group openly here in council. But for you to have a private meeting with Gary could really potentially backfire, because he may think you said something different than what you really meant or whatever. And then, I just hate to raise, I don't think that's a great idea. I mean, I don't mean that in a disrespectful way because you're not good at it or something. It has nothing to do with the quality of your interactions, but I just don't think that's the right approach.
Okay. My sense is that council wouldn't object if we go ahead with the executive session, talk about it, get advice, and then decide to go from there. Is that okay? Nancy? Okay. All right. Do we have anything else we want to discuss on this topic at the present time? Do we have any questions that we'd like to have Becca research? I guess not. Becca, thank you very much. That was a lot of work.
Thank you.
I was surprised at how much material there was in the packet to read. So thank you very much. Okay. Let's see. Next, we've got a hearing. This is item DA 2201, extension of development agreement at 1309 Manitou Avenue. This will be a hearing, so we'll first hear from the planning department, and then I expect we'll hear from the applicant. We can entertain public comments, reverse the process, hearing from the applicant and then the city. Thank you. Hannah?
Thank you. Chelsea Stromberg, Senior Planner for the record. The purpose of this item is to extend an existing development agreement that at 1309 Manitou Avenue for 2 years. The major development plan was originally approved by Manitou Springs City Council in November of 2017. Original approvals of major development plans are valid for 1 year. After that, a 1-year extension was administratively approved in accordance with the code in 2018. And in November of 2019, council approved an extension for 3 years. The applicant has indicated that recent delays due to the project on the west end of Manitou Avenue, including street, utility, and sidewalk improvements, that has been the cause of the delay for this session of the development agreement. The proposed development agreement includes language that the vested rights shall be extended to December 31st, 2023, which is 1 year from now, with the second year of the extension to December 31st, 2024, contingent on the obtainment of a building permit by 2023. Staff also recognizes that the development has been approved and extended within the regulations of the current zoning code. However, with the pending adoption of a revised land use development code, certain aspects of the development may not meet the proposed standards. City planning staff recommends extending the development agreement 1 additional year with a second year contingent upon obtaining a building permit from the Pikes Peak Regional Building Department by the end of 2023. City planning staff agrees with the applicant's statement on work on the west end of Manitou Avenue would have made construction on the parcel difficult and may have interfered with the property owner's ability to market the proposal. Construction is now nearing completion on that project. Should City Council find it appropriate to grant the extension, staff recommends the following conditions. Number 1, barring extreme unforeseen circumstances, no further extension shall be authorized. And number 2, staff shall review the building permit under the zoning code as it exists as of November 1st, 2022, today, until December 31st, 2023. For building permits issued after that date, the development shall be required to conform with the most recently adopted version of the Land Use and Development Code. And this concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Hannah?
Thank you. Hannah Van Den Morgan McGuire, City Planning Director. I just wanted to clarify what exactly those changes would be in accordance with the proposed code as it's currently written. So of course, that's a draft and things could change pending City Planning Commission as well as City Council hearings. But we did a preliminary review. This is not meant to be a totally comprehensive 3-week staff review, but just to give an idea as to the difference between us honoring the existing code, the code that it was approved under, and potentially a change that might be required if it were to be reviewed under the proposed code. So I do want to acknowledge that the development did go above and beyond what is required in the existing zoning code. So there really wouldn't be a whole lot of changes. Really what would change is if it went through as it's currently proposed, there would be a required change to the architecture of the structure, where above the 28-foot height limit, they would have to step the building back 10 feet. It does meet the minimum or the maximum height that is being proposed in the zone, so they wouldn't need to lower the height of the structure or anything like that. They would just need to push that top portion back 10 feet. They also would be required to probably add more vegetation. We are adding a significant section for landscape requirements. Those landscape requirements don't really exist in the existing code. However, they are proposing to add landscaping. So they are going above and beyond the minimums there. There just would likely be a requirement to add a few more trees. Also, under the proposed code, it's likely that they would be required to add a couple of electric vehicle charging stations or infrastructure for such, as well as infrastructure for potential solar panels. And when we were looking at the parking requirements, the applicant or the development does provide an excess of minimum parking. And under scenarios that I could potentially foresee, they still would meet the minimum parking requirement. Things that it does already meet with the proposed code. So it does already meet the proposed facade articulation standard, where for 60% of the structure, it needs to be set back a little bit further. It does meet that standard. And it does meet the new exterior lighting requirement standards. And as I mentioned, the parking would likely be fine. However, if there was something that we can't foresee, they could move forward with a variance or some other alternative. So I just wanted to be clear with when we're talking about honoring the existing code and versus the proposed code, exactly what those standards would be. And that's what I identified in that preliminary review. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful. Council, questions for planning folks? Judith?
Hannah, would there be any change in the requirement for undergrounding any utilities?
That standard exists today, so they would still be required to do that.
Julie?
So Hannah, if I understand you correctly, the first thing you said was if they wanted to build up to the maximum height allowed, then under the new code as it's currently been revised and not yet approved, I understand, they would have to do more, they would have to set the building further back on the property. Did I hear that correctly?
So the way that the proposed code is written, that you could have the first 28 feet of your structure right on the setback line, but then any height above 28 feet would have to be pushed 10 feet back. So it's really an additional setback for a height of a structure above 28 feet. So just the distance between 28 and 35 on the proposed structure in the development agreement would need to get pushed back 10 feet.
So if this were to get approved under the existing code, you're saying that's one of the things that they'd be able to get. They wouldn't have to comply with the new code. They'd comply with the old code, which allows them to build higher and toward at the setback.
That's correct. So they would be allowed to, under the existing code, the code that we're operating under today, they're allowed to build up to 35 feet right at the setback line.
Thank you.
Other questions from council? Okay, if not, let's go ahead and give the applicants an opportunity to speak. Thank you. And gentlemen, if okay, so you press the button, the green light comes on to talk. You need to get about 3 inches from the microphone. This is all being recorded. So if you'll give us your name and address, please.
David Walton, 555 County Road 7781, Woodland Park, Colorado.
I'm Todd Liming with Planning Matters, 438 North Prospect Street, Colorado Springs, Colorado 80903. Thank you. Good evening.
All right. Yeah, so we're asking for a 2-year extension. Julie, you were on the planning commission, I think, when we came by for the extension, and I remember, I think there was a provision in there for if building codes change that we would work under the new building codes. I'm pretty sure.
Apparently, the planning director doesn't agree with you.
Yeah.
Is that
okay.
true or not true? That's just a fact.
Well, that's my recollection, and I think you and I discoursed about that at that time.
Well, recollection doesn't
But
help me.
the yeah, 35 feet versus 28, that would definitely when we originally conceived the plan, we had the main building back off of Manitou Avenue, but planning at that time asked us to move it up to Manitou Avenue, which so.
David, could you speak a little closer to the mic, please?
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Yeah. We originally conceived the main building to be towards the back of the property and the parking up front. And so I think there's going to be there's going to be definitely architectural work to be done with an extension, so. But we're asking for 2 years, the getting a building permit by December 31. That's I work for a commercial contractor, you can barely get one, in 8 months. So an actual permit. So perhaps maybe if you don't feel you can see your way to a 2-year extension, maybe instead of a permit in hand, December 31, have plans submitted or something like that. But plans submitted to the building department, which would then result in a permit by summer of 2023, something like that. But, so.
Okay. Thank you. Did you have anything else? Or Todd, do you have comments?
Just a couple of comments. Am I close enough to the mic?
Yeah.
Feel like I'm too loud. We're showing 14 trees. Landscaping, Hannah brought up the landscaping enhancements to the landscaping code. We're already, I believe, comfortably above code. If those standards change, we can meet those standards. That's not an issue. Carving out a 10-foot setback for the 3rd floor above 28 feet would be a bit of a challenge, but we have a creative architect on board, so we can begin to look at some of that. Outdoor lighting, I'm a believer in dark sky. One of your predecessors started the Dark Skies Society. He passed away a year ago. I think LED lighting downcast, low energy LED lighting downcast with cutoff shields is the way to go. I've done it on every project I've worked for exterior lighting. So that won't change. And if we need more robust cutoff shields, you'll just let us know. That's not a problem. We can change that. That's not a big ticket item. Excuse me a second if I can look at my notes. And I thought Hannah's presentation was extremely helpful. One of the differences, let's see, two comments, and then I'll wrap up. First of all, as David indicated, we did originally look at orienting this building more off of Welcome Lane. We brought a concept plan, a concept I've talked to Hannah about at points over the last couple of months. We brought that concept plan to the Planning Commission. Wade Burkholder, the planning director at the time, and Michelle Anthony, the senior planner at the time, urged us to bring the building forward. We did that in response to the city's representatives. We are close, but if you look at the front facade of the building, I think there's more undulation and more windows. We're hoping to get a cafe for 2/3 of that main floor, that Manitou Avenue main floor. So there's not going to be as much permanent facade as close to the sidewalk as I think currently exists for the Holiday Inn, which I know has been a concern. I've read about it in the Pikes Peak Bulletin. So we did respond to city staff request to bring the building forward, to consolidate the building and bring it forward. And we think we have an attractive building. We don't mind working on the architecture a little bit more to try to accommodate changes in the code. Thank you very much.
Council, do you have any questions for the applicants at this time? Okay, if not, I'd like to give the public an opportunity to speak. Gentlemen, and then the applicants will be allowed to come back and make comments as necessary. Yes, sir. Would you like to come forward, please? Okay, and I'll go ahead and declare the public comment portion open. Sir, if you'll give us your name and address, again, be about 3 inches or so away from the microphone when you speak. And
Do I need to measure?
No, that's close enough.
Okay. My name is Jim Ford. I live at 5 Minnehaha. I own that house and have for years. On the street that first block of Minnehaha from Colorado Avenue up to the Fork, there are 19 cars. We scuttle around trying to find a place to park. My partner can't park there because we're just no parking, period. But since they did the remodeling on the street and everything, they've taken away so much parking. How many apartments are going in this place? I haven't heard a word about it.
No, Todd, you'll have an opportunity to respond, okay?
Okay. No, I'm just questioning how many apartments are going to go in there.
Okay.
We can wait. I don't know that there are any apartments, but why don't we wait and ask for the developer
Okay.
to come back up and answer that question for you? Do you have any other
Okay.
questions?
Well, I thought it was going to be an apartment complex. Am I totally wrong?
I think the best thing to do is to go ahead and ask your questions, and then after we close the public comment, the applicants can respond to your questions.
Okay. Well, have been in the process or thinking that it was going to be a apartment complex going in up there. We have so much traffic on that corner from the where the roundabout is on up that are coming on down to Manitou. The traffic is terrible, period. People are walking and but the main thing is the traffic and no parking up there. And is all the parking going to be on their property? Or are they going to take the public parking off the street? Anyway, that's the things I'm concerned about is the parking area and the heavy traffic and so forth for that area. I love Manitou. I've been here for many, many years. And I just don't want to see a congestion of that end of town. And that's my concern. I just don't think there's been enough information given out to the public. I have never received a thing about what this is going in.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll try and get some answers here for you in a few minutes. Okay, thank you, Mr. Ford. Do we have anyone else who wants to speak to this? Judy, did we get any emails or any comment on this? Okay. All right, it appears that there's no one else that wants to speak to this, so I'm going to go ahead and close the public comment portion. You can always reopen it if necessary. So at this time, I'd like to give the applicants an opportunity to come back and respond.
Very good, Dave Walton. Yeah, so it's a 3-story building. Commercial on the bottom and then 2 floors of residential.
Dave, can you kind of move the microphone around so you can, we can all hear you? Good.
3 floors. Commercial on the bottom and then 2 floors of residential and apartments, yeah. And so there's 8 apartments there is what's drawn. We have, I think, Chelsea, what's the code for parking? Because we have all the spaces required. I believe it's
Todd Liming again. We have 27 parking spaces in the rear parking lot. And part of the reason why staff wanted us to move the building forward is so that we could hide most of the parking in the rear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. All right. And were there other questions? So how many units and how much parking? Yeah.
Mr. Ford, the public comments closed here, but it's a procedural thing here. I think we mainly want to get answers. Mr. Walton, if you could respond and just speak to us all.
Okay, right. So 8 apartments and 27 parking spots.
Okay, good. Did you have anything else you wanted to say?
No more comments. Any questions from anyone? Yeah.
Michelle?
Thank you. When you say commercial, are we looking restaurants, retail, a combination of both? I understand you mentioned a cafe.
Mhm. Yeah, commercial is just like downtown, So it could be any of the commercial things that we have in downtown Manitou, including restaurant, yeah.
And then when you say commercial, including downtown, are you saying local,
Oh, cool, right, sure,
locally owned?
right, yeah, no franchise type thing.
Okay,
without, Yeah, I mean, that's,
thank you.
we haven't got to that yet, what tenants would be in there. So I'm sure there's some permits and things to get when we get to that stage.
Council, other questions or comments? Okay. Although public comment's been closed, Mr. Ford, if you feel your questions have been answered, just give me a nod. Okay, good. Okay. Thank you. Okay. That's enough, sir. We were going to give you, this is a good chance for us to talk about things, get sorted out. Okay. Mr. Walton, I wanted to ask you, I mean, one of the contingencies here was for you to get the building permit. And I realized that regional has been, you basically slammed commercial permits. So you had suggested that perhaps filing a building plan or something would be the criteria that would be less of a hardship on you?
That's correct. I don't think there is the timing for actually getting a permit. There's a lot of parts that go into that.
I understand. Okay. Great. Is there anything else you want to say?
Yeah, we'd like the 2-year extension.
Okay, thank you. Last call, council. Any more questions for the applicant? No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Walton. Hannah? And I don't know if you have a whole lot to say here, but you heard that the applicant had asked to perhaps, instead of being required to get the building permit, to get the building plan together. So what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Mayor Graham. Hannah Van Den Morgen with the City Planning Department. Staff is supportive of altering the condition from getting approval of a building permit to making sure that a building permit has been applied for and is actively being reviewed. That could be supported by our department if that was the desire of City Council.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Council, any more comments or questions for Hannah? Judith?
So this was approved in 2017. I know a lot's happened since then. However, we are doing a deep dive into redoing the land use and development codes for a specific reason. And that is to protect the character of Manitou and enhance Manitou remaining as unique as it can be. And I will be really honest with you that I do believe that all future development should follow the new, more restrictive codes. I know that would be a little bit of a challenge for you, but I've looked at the plans and it can be done. And I'm one of those people that is now living across the street from a very tall building, 3 stories, set right off the street. And I'm concerned about Manitou having more of that. So that's where I said, I just really feel if we are going to, the purpose of embracing the new codes is to make sure that we hold all developers to the same standards. And that's my thoughts tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council comments?
Do you mean comments to each other or comments for Hannah?
Well,
I have
I'm so-
comments for us, but I don't have comments.
Oh,
for Hannah.
look, I'm sorry. I should have been a little more precise. Comments for Hannah or questions for her. If not, we can move to deliberation. Okay, thank you, Hannah. Okay, I think the sentiment of council as I read it is we're ready to discuss this and deliberate. So Julie, did you have something? Or then Mr. Shade after that?
I'd like to mirror Judith Chandler's sentiments. In the last 5 years since this was originally approved and since I was on the committee that approved it, a lot has changed. I am very enthusiastic about the new code, the new land use code. And I think it's in the best interest of the city. And I think it's in the best interest of our environment that after all this work we're putting into the new code and not very many new, developmental lots left in town, we might as well apply this development to the new code. So I'm not in favor of extending the existing permit. I want to see that the new code is applied to this project, not just with respect to the setbacks, not just with respect to the vegetation and the EV charging station and so forth, but the whole 9 yards. And there are density issues and there may be some additional environmental considerations that get incorporated into the code that aren't even in the proposal that we just got. So I would much prefer to protect our citizens and make sure that this new large development complies with our new code. I haven't heard any compelling reason why we should make things a little more convenient for the developer at the expense of our residents. So I'll be voting no.
Mr. Shada?
I believe Todd had commented that a possible change to the setback of 10 feet could probably be complied with. Is that true? Did I understand it right? You can shake your head and I'll enter your head into the record what it is.
It might be more precise if you come forward, Todd, please.
Yeah, thank
Because
you.
we're
All right.
better to have all this on the
All right,
record.
all right. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Todd Liming again. Thank you for the question. There is a little bit of wiggle room and within the site plan. And if David Walton starts shaking his head no, then you'll know that I am not correct. The wiggle room has to do with the width of the drive aisle on the backside of the building. If we narrow that up a little bit, we can begin to inch the building back. I don't believe that there is 10 feet to inch it back, but we might be talking a couple of feet if that makes a difference. Does that answer your question, Councilmember Shade?
Okay, can I also just clarify that you would be possibly willing to, and you don't think that would be a hardship, to comply with the updated landscaping requirements?
Not at all.
And in addition, the EV and the solar requirements in the new code?
I would love to know more about them.
Well, I believe, without going into details, I believe it's basically providing the electrical infrastructure for those types of things. Hannah is shaking her head.
Yes.
Okay.
The answer is yes. If the requirement is to be solar ready, PV solar ready, I think that that's the kind of upgrade that we need to buildings, all buildings going
Okay.
forward.
So
Does that
you
answer
don't
your
think- You
question?
don't, that wouldn't be a hardship to comply with the new code requirements for that, right?
Correct.
Okay,
Thank
and
you.
then you also talked about the dark sky lighting requirements that are in the new code. You would be able to comply with that?
I would hope we could exceed them, but
Okay.
we will certainly comply with them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I just have a quick clarification question.
Okay, Natalie?
Did you understand that the building did not need to be set back 10 feet, the third floor?
Yes,
So the driveway wouldn't need to necessarily change. That if you just move the whole building back, it would not meet the code.
I understand. I
Okay.
believe that I understood Hannah's comment.
Excellent. Okay.
And my response was the whole building might be able to inch back. It will perhaps be an architectural challenge that is far beyond me to talk about a 10-foot further setback on the third floor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments, questions from council? Yeah, we're still in discussion. We're in deliberation. Okay, John, did you have something else?
I guess I'm sympathetic to the fact that, you know, during COVID and all the complications that we had on the east end, that this would be a very, very difficult property for people to envision what it might look like. I think a lot of us in the community were sometimes going back to the plans and hoping that it was going to get finished and be wonderful. So that's why I was asking the questions. I guess I would hate if the applicant could comply with those 4 items, okay? Then I think that would save essentially a whole, you know, rehearing of the whole thing. And so that's where I was going after, was trying to figure out, you know, sort of kind of a reasonable path forward so that in granting a 2-year extension like Mr. Walton had requested, which I think is perfectly reasonable, okay, to do. It just seems like to me, there's something we ought to get out of it in terms of possibly, since we're so close to meeting the current requirements, that then having the applicant could go through all of this stuff. I was trying to save them from that. So that's why I was interested in, I guess I still don't have a clear idea in terms of if it's reasonable to you folks that you could possibly meet the height in the 10-foot setback, like Natalie kind of clarified. You know, she's worked very hard on this committee, okay? And it seemed like to me, I don't have a clear reading from the applicant as to whether that's possible to comply with that.
Yeah. So,
David, if you give us your name and address again, please.
you bet. David Walton, 555-781 County Road, Woodland Park, Colorado. So, I'm just sitting here, but I guess if you're gonna go 28 feet, if you're gonna keep the building at 28, or maybe you could go down a little bit, you know, the main floor, maybe the floor could go down a little bit, or the first 2 floors are the same. The third floor then moves back. The parking lot on the back is at the level of the second floor. So, I mean, I guess it's conceivable, or you just have a smaller, instead of a 2,000 square foot third floor, you have something smaller than that, right? Yeah, I mean, we're not trying to not meet the codes. I mean, we understand, you know, electric charging stations and landscaping, all those things. Yeah. Yeah. And if it's 28 feet, you know, will be 28 feet on the front, or you know, everything we come with is going to need to be approved. I think you guys will get a chance to approve everything, don't you?
Well, I think what we have here before us is an existing approval, okay? And so I'm just trying to figure out in terms of. And then my next question was going to be asking staff whether if you guys were amenable to this 10-foot requirement of the new code, could they basically, administratively approve that and make sure it complies, or whether staff felt like it needed to go back toward planning commission for approval. So I'm just trying to figure out how to be reasonable with you guys so that you walk out of here tonight with maybe only some minor changes, okay, to the plan. And it seems like to me, the big bugaboo is this 10-foot thing. So I'm just trying to get a better understanding of that, because my next question, had there been sort of nods from you, I was prepared to kind of make a motion to extend it for 2 years, subject to certain conditions. But before I would do that, I would want to ask the staff whether they could administratively, deal with that in terms of, or not. Sure.
May I ask a question while they're consulting?
Just a minute, we've got Nancy, then
Oh,
Judith,
sorry.
and then Julie, so.
I think,
but-
if I could.
but, Just a minute, I think maybe Mr. Walton wants to respond to John, and then Nancy, if we could, or is your question bear on same thing?
My question is simply asking staff if we can apply. I'm in favor of what the Mayor Pro Tem suggested. If we as a council can approve this tonight with an additional condition saying that the items that you outlined earlier that are not currently in compliance with the new code, not that they're not in compliance because they can't be in compliance. I mean, there's no code yet, but if they are, if we could set that condition for them and then give them permission to go out and do great things, is that a possibility? That's kind of what I would like to do if,
Thank you
And-
for,
and then
thank
if
you for
they're not-
underscoring the bottom line there. Thank you.
yeah, to me, that would give them the opportunity to go out and start getting their, well, they'll have to do a little bit of redesigning. But, and if they can't or are unable to comply with that condition, then they have to start over, which they may have to do anyway. So
Just nice, make a comment. So this goes to the vested rights issue that we're dealing with. If you extend the agreement, vested rights, if you extend their vested rights, it means they can basically build pursuant to the current code. Any changes to the code that occur later during the vested rights period, they won't have to comply with. And so what I think you're proposing is to remove the vested rights, and then they would basically have to comply with whatever's in effect at the time they seek a building permit.
I don't know the legal, I was just thinking if there's a condition, we can set any conditions we want, correct?
Well,
There are 2 conditions currently listed here.
right. I guess my point was, I think the whole point of the extension was that they would be able to build under the current code. And so if we want to allow them to build under the current code but comply with other provisions in the new code, if they go into effect, then we'd have to basically just clarify which conditions that are not subject to the vested rights period. So vested rights period gives them the right to build under the current code. If you want to extend that period and then accept out certain things like solar, landscaping, dark skies, you could do that.
I was suggesting, so they're under the current code and we just add conditions for those things, the height, the setback, the lighting, the landscaping, that they must comply with those.
Yeah,
Additional
so
conditions.
if that's gonna be where we go, we would just basically, you would have to approve it and I'd just redo the agreement subject to your modifications, because the one in your packet doesn't contemplate that, but we could make a revision based on your motion. If that's something that the applicant's willing to do. And staff can manage. It's doable legally.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Okay.
He's making a face and that face to me says, oh my God, this
Well,
is
no,
gonna be
it's-
such a
The only
crazy,
reason I was
horrible
making the
mess.
face was like, I kind
right?
of thought the whole purpose of the agreement that we put together basically is to give them a bigger vested rights period. That was kind of the entire purpose of it. And so we're doing something that's very different, but if they're agreeable and council wants to approve it that way, we could draft the agreement to do that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Parker. Judith?
I just wanted to clarify my stance on this, and that is, I have no problem extending your project a year. I have no problems extending it 2 years. I have no problems extending the time that you need to have a permit issued. Those are not my issues. I would love to see your development happen. My thing is, there's been several developments here in Manitou that scare me. And they scare me because they look just like Colorado Springs and Denver. And I see Manitou, the character of Manitou, just chipping away and chipping away. And the whole purpose of the new land use and development codes is to hold this town to my opinion, a different standard. And what I'm hearing you say is it wouldn't be really that difficult. You have some, as you say, wiggle room. My only condition is that your development adhere to the new codes. So your extension, I'm happy with that. I'd like to see the entire development adhere to the new codes. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie.
I have a question for Nancy. Miss Nancy. This is a little variation on what you proposed. What I would like to see is more what Judith was just saying. I don't mind if it's legally possible to, even though it's a little goofy, to extend and give them 2 more years to work on this and to pull their permit. But I would like to have it be under the condition that they have to wait until the new code is approved and they have to comply with the new code. And if they can't comply with the new code, then no, because it's great. And I really appreciate that Hannah has been able to outline for us which specific provisions in the new code as it currently exists are different from the current code and which things they'd have to change. But there may be other things as well that get added. And so I don't want to preclude the possibility of improving our land use code between now and when it gets adopted by us and have them be exempt. So if they're willing to comply with the new code and not start until the new code, is approved on second reading, then I don't need them to pay a whole new filing fee is I guess what I'm trying to say for their application and go through all of that. But once the new code is passed, there would have to be obviously a review at that time by the planning department to identify areas in which the previous plans need to be modified and then go through planning commission if need be. I'd be fine with that. I'm not trying to make life difficult for them or have them have to pay another filing fee for this thing, but I do not want them to be exempt from any other issues in the new code that may be passed. And so that's why I'm more interested in the nuance that Judith added to Nancy's position. What do you think about that, Nancy?
I'm not sure how much time that would add. I see that I'm not a big advocate of giving 2 years unless the permits are pulled by December 31st of 2023. To me, that's 14 months from now. So I'd like them to get started on that sooner rather than later. I would very much like to see this development go forward. So I don't know what the timing issues are.
We already have that, I think, on the agenda.
And also, my
timing?
sense was that the work session we had, was it last week? It seemed like we were just tweaking last minute things on the draft code. So I trust Hannah I trust Hannah's thoughts on this, that's probably going to be the only things that are different between what they've submitted and what the new code will look like. I don't see anything else drastic being incorporated into it at this point in time.
I didn't get that to be her thoughts. Is that your intuition? Is that your psychic prediction, Hannah, that there's not going to be anything really major that anyone is going to propose? And if they do, it won't pass. It'll be voted down. Do I understand? That's what you said? I thought you were simply pointing out the current differences.
Thank you, Councilor Wolf. For the record, Hannah Van Den Wagen McGuire with the Planning Department. So in regards to this particular development did go above and beyond what is required in the current code. So the new land use and development code as a whole is very different than our current code. However, because this particular applicant didn't do the bare minimums of what our current code is. There isn't a huge change between what they're proposing and the new code other than what I outlined.
Thank you. That's a little different than what you said, Nancy, which is you're pretty sure that Hannah said there won't be any big changes in the future. I guess that, I guess
Okay,
we'll
I
see.
take back what I thought Hannah said, and I will just say that my impression is that there aren't going to be any big changes. Thank you.
Just for the benefit, the plan relative to the code update is to discuss it on first reading on December the 20th, and then to hear it on second and final reading on January the 3rd. So that gives you a little bit sense of timeline as to when we'd actually have not conjecture, but when we'd actually have words on paper and you would know, we'd all know what the rules are. So we're not too far from having that done. I think that's driving a lot of councils thinking here we are close. Here we have the opportunity to have the first major project in the West End to really be something of a showcase. This would be an opportunity to not only start, but to start right. I think that's probably some of our concern. I'm sympathetic to the applicant. They did things, they went above and beyond. And then the road was torn up for much longer than any of us had anticipated. So that really threw their plans, put a real wrench in the works. They had COVID. I mean, that complicated the road, has complicated everything. So I'm sympathetic to that. And now I understand that, like regional building is slammed with commercial permits and so forth. So I think the intent that I read from council is we'd like to see this project go forward. We'd like not to cause extra hardships for the applicants, and we would still like to have this really be a showcase, project. My sense is that we could work out the details. I know that's a little bit reckless when the city goes and puts its signature on something, but it seems like Hannah has confidence that we could get this worked out. Council, I think Nancy kind of stated it in sort of an intuitive way. How was it? Let's make this thing work. And then I realized that kind of glosses over a couple of details, but how'd you put that, Nancy?
If it's legal and possible, if we could just set an additional condition in addition to the two that are in the staff recommendations, that the developer incorporate the changes that Hannah outlined when she first briefed this evening. I can't remember what they all were. It was setback, EV stations. John, I think you had them all.
It was set back of 10 feet. I'm checking to see whether I took careful notes, landscaping, the plus, I put EV solar ready. And then I believe that Mr. Lemming added that they would exceed the dark sky. And those were, so Hannah had three things, and then I just picked up on Todd's thing that he thought that there would be no problem complying with that he felt that they either meet or could exceed easily any dark sky requirement that we would have. Thank you.
So I'm very comfortable with that as a proposal. I'm not making a motion at this point. John, if you want to make a motion, feel free. But I again would very much like to see this go forward. I think that they've put the time and the effort into it. I don't want to see it go past December 31st without a permit, though.
That's December 31st,
2023.
2023. Yeah.
14 months. I mean, you're saying that's unreasonable?
Go ahead.
I'm not saying it's unreasonable. I'm just saying it's not all controllable, So.
Well, I think in addition, you were asking for a 2-year extension.
Correct.
Okay, and staff had a little slightly different wrinkle than that, right? I'm looking for Hannah's shaking her head or not.
The
right?
2-year, if it's contingent upon the condition is if the petitions or if the permits are pulled by
The end of 2023.
December 31st or 30th, or whatever it is, 2023.
And I guess my comment was I was willing to say if the permits were pulled by the end of 2024. Okay.
question.
Judith?
I have a question for you. If you had to choose pulling a building permit by December 31st, 2023, and not having to comply 100% with the new codes, which it sounds like you're close, or having to pull a permit by December 31st, 2024 and be under the new codes, what do you feel is more likely to be successful for your project? If those were your two choices.
Yeah, Dave Walton, 555 County Road 781, Woodland Park. We would prefer to pull the permit by January 31, 2024. I was just thinking on my feet there of little modifications to get the 10-foot setback, but when Todd came up and consulted, he said that we're going to be able to do that. So we don't have any problem complying with the code that's going to be coming in January. And Judith, I think we ought to, bring our plan and you can see any changes to the facade and make sure, it's managed. So that's what I think.
Can I make a quick comment, Mayor?
Please
So
do so.
if basically the applicant's saying they're not going to have an issue complying with the code that's going to be in effect, we don't need to have, you basically can approve an extension with no vested rights. And then whatever code's in effect is what they're going to have to comply with. I think the whole point of the amendment was to give them vested rights so they wouldn't have to comply with the code. And if they're willing to do that, then we don't need to have a vested rights period at all.
So you're suggesting that that's sort of a way forward with a motion, which is to move approval of this with no vested rights. And by putting that language in there, it just by default means they have to apply, they have to comply with whatever the planning code and regional building code is in effect at the time that they.
That's right.
But we'd
Okay.
still have to say by December 31 of 24, we'd still have to.
You're basically extending the development plan 2
Right.
years
Yeah, exactly.
with no
Thank you.
vested rights.
Okay, I'm just,
Yeah,
you were trying to say.
nope, I
Thank
was
you.
just waiting to see where we're heading and that's where I think we are now.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Walton, with that, and I guess Mr. Lyman also, would you guys be okay with that?
We'd be fine. We'd be fine with no vested rights. Yeah.
Okay,
And would staff be okay with that? Okay.
okay. At the risk of sounding premature, I think we're ready for a motion. Mr. Shada?
I move approval of, I'm sorry, hold on just a second. I need to get to the right thing. Where is this thing? DA 2201. Extension of the development agreement at 309 Manitou Avenue. I'm sorry, 1309 Manitou Avenue. Okay, without any vested rights, as long as the applicant pulls their permits by December 31st, 2024.
I'll second.
Motion is second. Any further discussion, council? Now let's go ahead and vote.
We have a 7-0 vote in favor.
Great, thank you.
All right. Thank you, council.
Thank you very much.
Staff.
If there's no objections, let's take a 15-minute break. Abandon this. Yeah.
They know something we don't.
We're almost there.
They know.
The police are going to raid the joint here. Okay. All right, so we've got a couple of short items and then a couple of executive sessions. Next item is resolution number 1822, a resolution to support ballot issue 7A to continue the Pikes Peak Rural Transportation Authority's 1% sales tax. And I put this on there. I do serve as a director on the Pikes Peak Rural Transportation Authority. I prepared the resolution. I would ask council's support for this. This is I think it's gotten to the point where we're used to paying this tax. It generates a great deal of money in the region. I think this year we generated about $147 million Now that's distributed based on population. Manitou's share is 0.7%. That's not a big number until you multiply it times 147 million. So it's significant for us. If we had to make up the difference for our transportation projects, paving roads and so forth, it would be pretty hard to do, I think. So I can answer questions, or I could simply, if council's okay with it, we'll just call for motion. Nancy?
Just how much are we charged each year by PPRTA? As a city?
How much are we charged?
Yeah. How much are we paying? It's 1%, right?
Okay, this is a sales tax. I'm sorry. So anytime,
All I'm trying to do is compare the benefit we get based on how much we pay. I think it's big time in our favor. And I just think it's important for folks to understand that.
okay. Yeah, and I'm sorry, I don't know what that number is, but I think it's big time. I would have to check that out. Judith?
I just have a quick question. I support the resolution and I already turned in my ballot. I voted for it. But on the ballot, it has the long list of all of the projects. I read that whole list and just since you're involved with them, I didn't see, are there mass transit? Are there more mass transit projects coming? Because I didn't see any on the list that they listed on the ballot. And I would like to see PPRTA get more involved in micromobility and mass transit
Okay,
projects.
so relative to transit, okay, so the money that the taxes that PPRTA gets, 55% of that is spent for capital improvements. So basically new roads, 35% spent on maintenance, and then 10% goes to transit, which is basically Mountain Metro Transit. So they do a lot to help support the bus operations. And during the reports, typically the bus people will talk about the number of underserved populations that they help. During COVID, we had some fairly extensive detailed reports on that. And say that long list, and really the intent there is to explain to the voters, to the citizens, what they're going to get for their money. It's basically kind of a sales order. In Manitou's case, we have a fairly concise list, and what we tried to do was to say basically we're a small town. We don't really know in a 10-year scope how many actually 20-year scope. How involved this is going to get and exactly what we're going to do. So we tried to kind of leave it loose so we had the authority to do what we needed to do. And initially, when we submitted that, we thought it was going to work. It was refused the first time it came in front of the board. They felt it wasn't specific enough. So we went back to the drawing board and added Serpentine Drive onto it. So, and that's something we'll get to now. We would have the opportunity to use money on Ruxton or any of our other streets or projects. So again, we tried to give ourselves as much wiggle room as possible. Other questions? Okay. And Nancy, I'm sorry, I should know how much we contribute. So the
We could
city.
look at the budget and see what our sales, it would be in the budget,
Yeah,
right? What our projected sales
well,
income is for 2022.
I just want to say I completely support the resolution. I just thought it was important for people to know that both the direct and the indirect benefit of PPRTA is, I believe, strongly in our favor. So I
Right.
just thought that would illustrate it, but it's not critical to have that for my support of this resolution.
Okay. Well, PPRTA would get 1 cent when the city of Manitou gets 3.9 cents. So it roughly, what we collect and pay in is about what we pay to PPRTA, or what they collect through Manitou sales would be about a fourth of what we collect in sales tax. So it's a
Mayor,
continuing source.
I would be willing to make a motion.
Okay, thank you.
I move that we pass resolution number 1822, a resolution to support ballot issue 7A to continue the Pikes Peak Rural Transportation Authority, also known as PPRTA, 1% sales tax.
Do we have a second? Have a second? Any further discussion? Not, let's vote. Okay, thank you very much. So I'm sorry. Go ahead, Judy. I'm sorry, I jumped the gun.
You were right on your vote knowledge here. So it was 7-0 in
Okay,
favor.
so it's clairvoyant. So I'll go buy a Powerball ticket for the benefit of the city. We can clear up a lot of our problems. We win. Okay, well, thank you all. I appreciate it. Yeah, that'll give me something to do with the afternoon of the second Wednesday every month. Okay. Second item, discussion regarding the annual city administrator's performance review process, council input and timeline. And I put that one together too. I'd like to explain a little bit. I know Councillor Chandler has a little bit different take. My thought was this is something we wanted to get done by the end of the year. 2 years ago, we did paper forms and I compiled them and organized them and we got through it that way. Last year, John Shada had volunteered to come up with and Natalie, I'm sorry that the two of you came up with an online system, which was extensive. I think we collected a great deal of information. It was largely narrative. But I anticipated this year, John, that you wouldn't have the time to be involved in that. So I had included in the packet a sample questionnaire that's relatively quick and easy. It's used by at least one other jurisdiction, Woodland Park. So I put that in front of you. What I was thinking, we have tentatively, we scheduled some time on November the 15th to discuss the city manager's performance. And then also an executive session on December the 6th. Now, I think part of the idea originally that I had was for the 15th to basically get council input. We can do it several ways. We can, if you want to do the questionnaire, we could say the 15th is when we'd like to have the questionnaire data in. We can, and I guess if it slipped into January, that wouldn't be a complete disaster. So with that, I know Judith had some concerns. So Judith, why don't you make comments?
Thank you, Mayor. And you know, the reason why I sent that email out was just to make sure that I didn't want you to feel blindsided, but I think this is one of the most important things that council does. And I just want to honor the process. And I believe that an evaluation should do two primary things. One, it should be meaningful and measurable in some way. And the second thing is it should provide our city administrator with some solid information to look at what she's been successful with, and also to give her some guidance so that she really continues to grow and prosper in her role. And so I did a deep dive into this proposed evaluation, and it just reminded me of the 2020 evaluation, which I just was so unhappy with. And I thought, well, I'm gonna do a practice thing, and I just don't feel that this particular tool would tell Denise anything. I'm concerned about the rating system. For example, I would never want a not applicable option, because if a question's not applicable, then it shouldn't be on her evaluation, right? I mean, if it's right, you see what I mean? So I would, so I'll just give you some examples. On core competencies, number 1, relationship with city council, there are 17 bullet points, but there's actually approximately 30 competencies, because there's so many ands that we have several sentences throughout the entire document that are actually asking you to give one rating on 2 or 3 competencies. For example, maintains a high standard of honesty, integrity, and trust. And while those are similar, those are different qualities. And also, I think there's a number, I think we can shorten this up. There's a number of things that I think are just really horrible questions. And I'm just going to give you a couple examples. Here's one under communications, number 2. Information received is not as detailed and technical as to the point of being unhelpful. That's a question. That's the quality or a competency. Here's another one. Communications communications effectively inform and educate citizens and constituencies affected by issues being addressed by the council consistent with the need to avoid jeopardizing the city. So here's what I would like to propose is that I'd be willing to volunteer my time to work with another council person and use this as a template and go through and first propose a rating system and then go through these questions one by one and see if they're pertinent or if they could be rewritten and focus on the competencies that we are really looking for. And I looked at a couple other city manager performance goals from other cities, and there's some really good ones out there. And so anyway, that's just my take. I just don't think that if we take the time to go all the way through this, that she's going to get what she needs. Here's one more. Exercises sound and accurate judgment and providing support and explanation of reasons for decisions. That is so, I mean, I can't rate Denise on this because I don't even understand the question. So those are just some of my thoughts. I think it's a great place to start. And anyway, I'm willing to do take a look at it and bring a draft if someone else is willing to help me with it. So just an offer.
Okay, and maybe it'd be appropriate, John, what would your thoughts be on redoing what you did last year? Let's see if that's an option that'd be on the table.
I believe that 2 members of council asked for a blank sheet to start this year from to take notes on. So I don't think that would be difficult if we just wanted to use the tool from last year per se. I mean, I didn't get a lot of feedback on changes to those questions. I think there were a few things, but so I suppose that I think I could go in and change the year number. And I think I think one of the big barriers to last year was that you needed for me to feel like the evaluation was within our domain, that you had to have Google credentials. And so I think Michelle, I know, has a Gmail account, so that would comply. So that would be, so I think as long as everybody else still has those kind of things, that was kind of a big setup thing last year.
What kind of things everybody still has?
Well, people, you
Like a
needed
Google
to
account?
have some kind of Google credentials. So because I did not feel comfortable sending out links to people that if somebody else discovered the link, they could see your work and I wouldn't know that somebody else had seen your work. So that was one of the main criterias. So I think we already have that with Michelle. So that was sort of kind of a big deal with some people to kind of set that up.
Okay, so John, are you saying that the tool would be available?
Yeah, I could.
Okay.
I could do
You
that.
could do that.
You know, I mean, if you probably had asked me that, you know, whether it would be kind of ready and stuff like that, like 3 weeks ago, you know, I probably would have choked you to death in terms of.
Glad I didn't answer that question.
By the
Yeah.
end of the year, you know what I mean? It was like, because my life was kind of rather, you know, a mess. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm asking you nicely. Okay, and my understanding is you could make the tool work. So that option's on the table. Okay. So I think council wants to have clear understanding of what our options are. So your tool will be available. I guess we could use the same questions from last year, which.
I mean, that would provide some continuity.
Yeah.
I think the next question that I would like to know about, because we are evaluating somebody who we know and who is in this room. And I guess I would like to know whether Denise would feel like that tool, you know, would be useful again, or whether it was useful in the last year. If not, I think we ought to pursue what maybe Judith is suggesting, which is to pick something different. I mean, to me, if it's not useful to the employee, okay, then to me, I don't want to, so I think we need to have that discussion too.
Let's get Michelle and then maybe Denise would like to weigh in. Michelle?
So core competencies in the evaluation that you had last year, are the core competencies in there? And then what are they? And then is it just for the city administrator or is it all of staff too?
Staff uses an entirely different questionnaire.
So maybe I need to send you what those questions look like so that you would know what John's asking about in terms of using that tool.
Judith?
Just, so if I could just segue on what you just said, to ask Denise, which I think is really important. We could do a hybrid where we could just review. I think there are some questions here on the evaluation that is in our packet. I think there's some really good ones. And so maybe we just need to take a look at it and maybe kind of do a hybrid. What I do love about Mayor Pro Tem's evaluation is we don't have to fill out 20 pages of paperwork. It's just, there, and it's all what's the word I'm looking for? It's collated. Yeah. And so that was just wonderful. So anyway, just a thought, we could just kind of review it and see if there's any questions that we need to read that need to be redone or reworded or some new ones we need to add. Thanks.
Well, I'd like to go around the table and get council's feel on this. We've got a couple options. Judith is willing to start from scratch. John can bring his system back. We can update it with questions either from the questionnaire I sent out or from other sources, or we could use the questionnaire that I included in the packet, which I don't. Oh yeah, but so let's be thinking about that. Let's see what Denise has to say.
Thanks. I was writing down my thoughts. So I've been listening and I have several items to share. I do think some consistency allows me to look at comparison. And we have changed it every year. And so it's really hard for me to know whether you think I have grown or whether you think I moved back and what areas. So consistency allows some comparison. The one from last year, I think, was 87 questions or more, which is a pretty substantial number. And I think that's a little overwhelming, but it does allow the consistency. The other thing I want to say is feedback is a gift. And I appreciate gifts, but I would ask as you look at this to also look at what I've improved upon. And when I look at last year's review, there wasn't a lot of items saying, here's something that you've done well, or here's what you've approved, but it's really what you tell me I need to continue to work on. So I would ask that this year that you really look at both sides of that, because I do believe I've improved on areas and I do believe that there's areas to work upon. So that is my feedback. I would also ask, if you want my version first, because I've always typed up my perspective of how the year has gone and how I think our relationship is and other relationships, but that takes a tremendous amount of time. And if I do that, do you want that to use that in the evaluation and do you utilize it? Because it does take me hours to do it and I don't mind doing it, but I only want to do it if it's going to be utilized. So that's my feedback. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So did we get that at the beginning before we used the tool last year? I just want to make sure. I just want to understand that process.
Yes, you got it several weeks before you did it. And I believe I heard, I'd have to go back, but I believe I heard several individuals saying they didn't utilize that, which is fine, but I just don't want to spend the time putting it together if it's not something you're going to utilize in my evaluation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, as I recall, it was pretty thorough. I mean, it was we had a lot of narrative responses. I think it was all narratives. And I went back and I looked at it last week. It was 83 pages long, the Excel spreadsheet. So it does require, I realize it requires a pretty significant time commitment, not only on Denise's part, but on the part of council. So, if it was somewhat abbreviated, I don't think that would hurt. But at the same time, we do this once a year. We probably ought to have some sort of balance between thoroughness and efficiency. Can we go around the table and see what people's druthers are? Julie, let's start with you.
Well, I think we should use as a basis John's tool from last year so that Denise can finally have the benefit of some consistency. I think that makes sense. Denise's comment about wanting a specific question added on what do you think I improved in? What do you think I didn't improve in, or something like that? I don't think that's a problem, but it would be really interesting because now that we have 2 years, we'll have 2 years worth. Maybe there could even be a column, last year, this year, difference. I mean, I don't know, maybe that would be helpful if you could program so that maybe last year she got 112, excellent points, and maybe this year it's 150. I don't know. The other thing is, I think it makes sense to see if there are certain questions that can be eliminated so it's not quite so long, as the mayor was saying, that there might be some things that are a little redundant or unnecessary. And I also like Judith's idea about taking a look at what is already in the packet, and if some of those points are missing from John's. It's hard to imagine anything missing because that thing was so darn long. But if there's something missing that could be helpful, I don't mind adding that in. But I think that makes a lot of sense. It is a lot of work for us, but Denise deserves feedback. And like you said, since she only gets it once a year, we should be willing to do the work. And so that's my position. Thanks.
Thank you. Natalie?
I'm comfortable with Julie's recommendations. And then in terms of Denise giving us feedback in advance, that is really helpful for me. But that being said, I don't know if there's a way to limit like a 1-pager or something so that you're not spending too much time on it. I think for me, it's literally just highlighting the year because I tend to just remember, the 3 months or 4 months around me and miss some of the big things or forget some of the things that have been accomplished. So.
Thank you. John?
I think if people wanted a comparison between the 2 years, my instinct, my proposal is that I would hope you would, whatever evaluation tool we use, that you wouldn't look at the previous year until you did the current year. Okay, so that I think that's sort of I don't know what to say, that's sort of a little kind of cheating in terms of, I think you ought to have kind of a clear idea in terms of in this time frame and not kind of coloring things from what was kind of history. But I think if you wanted that so that it could compare at the end, I think I could make the tool so that you could see the change between the 2 years, if that would be helpful.
Okay, that's interesting.
I guess I understand Judith's offer, and I could not partner with you because Natalie and I went through lots and lots of these things, and it took us a long time to kind of really distill what we liked. And I'm kind of feeling like here we are in November, and I don't feel like we could kind of meet the end of the year deadline by going through that unless you could just send me something that you thought was just absolutely stellar beyond belief that I could maybe adapt the framework of the tool. One of the ideas in using the tool was to end up so that we would have a clear way of seeing everybody's responses. And if you remember, the tool we used in the first year, we weren't clear about who was giving what rating. And I think Natalie and I felt that that was really important to both the person who was being evaluated, but to the rest of us, that we knew whose comments were who. So I would hope we wouldn't go back to using the first year thing. I think that was a great effort. I think we learned a lot in that, but I think there is some stuff that last year's tool, I think, improved on. I agree, it's pretty exhaustive, okay? Those categories, Natalie and I did not invent them, okay? All right. All right, we did find something. It was a very thorough, it was like the best of the set of questions that we could find. I'm perfectly willing to look at additional questions if you want. And then I think, we'll highlight those if you want those added so that people know that if we do this comparison, why there isn't anything to compare from the year before. So that's my comments.
Okay, thanks, John. Michelle?
I think my head is going to burst. So if I could please have just a 1 page of what you have accomplished this year, and then what your goals are for 2023. That would be helpful, as I just got elected January of 2022. I don't believe we should have 87 questions. I all of a sudden felt like I needed a number 2 pencil, and strongly agree, disagree, even non-applicable, right? And then a year from now, when the evaluation comes up, we're going to use the same evaluation. I mean, I work for a major company, and to hear core competencies, that's the value of Comcast as a whole. And then when you said that her core competencies were different from her staff, I was like, how can I work for someone whose core competencies are different than mine? And then I'm not saying we all obviously have to discuss this tonight, but in the future, I would like to discuss what the city government as a whole, what our values are, what the competencies are for our employees. Thank you.
Michelle, I'm not sure, but I think maybe I said something that you misinterpreted, and that is that the city uses HR uses an evaluation tool, but it's used on the other city employees, but historically we haven't used it for the city administrator. That's what I meant. So maybe I confused things.
So all I'm asking is if the core competencies of the staff should be the same ones as the city administrator. That's what I'm asking.
Okay, thank you. Judith?
So I really appreciate this discussion. I did a deep dive and did a lot of research, and I'm just learning so much about performance evaluations. And I have to tell you that the tool that Mayor Pro Tem Shada and Councillor Johnson came up with, I thought was so far superior to the one we used the year before, which I had a lot of difficulty with. So I have no problem going back and taking another look. I haven't looked at that tool for a year though. And so I think that maybe what we need to do is go back and refresh and take a look at it, and perhaps think about questions that maybe are redundant or we could eliminate, because I do agree it was long. But I'm thrilled with that. And I think that if we have a deadline to get information to Mayor Pro Tem Shada, that would, I think, help you probably, John. One of the things that I would love to see, and I don't want this to be cumbersome for you, Denise, but I would love to, and these can be bullets, it can be 1 page, but sometimes I forget everything that you've accomplished, and it's a lot. And so I really appreciate that overview of the things that you felt were really, your top accomplishments. And if you had any challenges, if there was something that you didn't get accomplished, but you couldn't because there were some roadblocks. And then based on the research that I've been looking at, is with a city administrator, it's really not fair to say, well, what are all your goals for the next year? Pick your top 3, but no more than 5 that you'd really like to work on so that we as a council know where you're coming from and can support and help you and work collaboratively. So I don't want that to be a huge homework assignment, but that would really help me a lot. So that's all. Oh, one of the things that I also didn't like about this performance evaluation, I guess it works in Woodland Park, but at the very end, it said, what are your goals for the city administrator for the next year? And I thought, I don't really, that's not important to me to give her my goals for her. I want you to tell us what your goals so we can support you in doing that. So that's all I've got. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Nancy.
I found it very, very useful to have Denise's version last year and her filling it out. So I found that incredibly helpful and I definitely used it. In terms of goals, I think that council needs to approve your goals, and I don't know that we've ever actually done that. I do think that you should set them, but I do think that we need to approve them. And I don't think we've ever done that, but I still think that the goals that you set for yourself last year, we need in order to assess you now. And I think you've usually put those like in the budget briefing. I would love it if Judith would, I'm all for using the form that John Shada came up with, because consolidating it takes so very much time otherwise. And that just was very incredibly efficient, even though very time consuming to fill it all out. However, with that, I am very much in support of Judith taking a look at it to take out some of the redundant and illogical questions. And I think that that would be not easy to do, but I think that at least there could be some quick review of that entire form and take out at least some of them based on redundancy or inapplicability. And I would also encourage council members when they fill out the evaluation. Last year, I noticed that some of us were putting comments that were from 2 years before. And if we're doing an annual evaluation, it should only address that particular year. So I would just ask us to be cognizant of that. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Nancy. It looks like there's significant support for using John's tool again this coming year. So John, I guess you're going to get to dust that off and bring it up to polish.
So let's also talk about the timeline.
Yeah,
in terms
exactly.
of when we have a goal of having it done by the end of the year, right? Okay.
Yeah, and remember that at the end of the year, our last meeting of the year is December the 20th, unless y'all want to work that week between
So
Christmas
I
and
guess
New
I
Year's.
just want to, if we can pull up a calendar or something like that, so that we know what our kind of our milestones are going to be, because I hear there is going to be somewhat of a review process of some of the questions. Okay. We need to know when the tool goes live, that Denise provides her narrative beforehand, right?
Right.
That was the
Mhm.
goal.
Yes.
So she needs to know that date. Okay. I need to know the date when the tool goes live. Okay.
Right, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, no,
And,
we
and I
expect
need
that.
to kind of have some overall feel for when it's green lighted to go, as opposed to that it's, and who are going to be is Judith going to be, kind of the sidekick editor, or is there any other people who are participating in that? And then does there need to be a pre-review of what we come up with? You know what I mean, with all of us and Denise before we greenlight it? Or do we think we're close enough that there's a few little tweaks and we can shortcut that? I'm just trying to figure out the timeline on this. Okay.
Right, yeah, it gets complicated. So I guess I would suggest a first phase is that Judith would get together with you and
So
go
maybe
over
what is our,
questions,
so what is
revise.
our, maybe our, okay, I'll do, be more concrete. What's the date we want to greenlight the tool and have it turned on? And then when should the results be collated and ready for council. Let's work on those two
Okay,
days.
so my thought is, okay, the plan is to not have council meetings on the 22nd or the 29th. That's the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. The 29th is the fifth Tuesday, and we wouldn't normally meet anyway. So those 2 weeks seem to me like gives council an opportunity to work on the evaluation. So let's say if the tool were ready by the 18th or the 19th, it's Friday, Saturday, that's for the Thanksgiving week. That gives you a little over roughly 2.5 weeks to get this put together. So that would involve Judith getting with you, John.
Or I guess, and anybody else
Or-
who wants to participate with it.
Yeah, if anybody else wants to have input, right, okay, yeah, and Denise would need to get her brief
So is that,
summary.
so is that okay with you, Denise, that you have your narrative ready by the 18th of the May? No?
Can I propose
Yes,
some timeline,
please.
please?
Yes.
I will have my narrative to you by Monday, November 21st.
Okay.
You would make it live and all of council would have to have it done by December 2nd. You take it to council meeting on December 6th in executive session. And then you give it to me from there after that. And you have one more executive session if you needed to discuss it.
Okay.
So that would
You
be.
went,
the
you went
timeline.
very quick for me.
Okay.
I cannot, my pen skipped.
So
So help me.
November 21st,
November
I would have-
21st is you were going to have your narrative ready.
I would have your narrative
And
ready.
then
You would
as-
make
then
it
a day or
live.
two after, you want the tool greenlit then.
Right. I think you could make it live on November 22nd. So people have time and it's up to them how they use it. It needs to be completed by December 2nd. All of council, that gives you a couple of weeks to go
Okay.
through it.
Okay, thank you.
And then you put it on the executive session for December 6th.
So that's when the merge is done. by
That's when the
December
merge,
6th and the
yeah.
results
Does
are
that
done.
give you enough time
Yes,
from the
okay. I
second
just
to
need to
the
know the
sixth? Yeah.
deadlines. Okay.
Then it would go on executive session for December
Because I don't want to
6th.
wait another week or 2 weeks
Yep.
to lose these dates.
Yeah, and then that gives you another executive session if needed.
Is that okay with everybody else?
Everybody good with that? Judith, can you turn your mic on?
So we need to be up with the tool on the 22nd.
Right.
Okay.
And then there's a milestone that Denise said that she would have by the 21st. Okay.
Right, yeah, so Denise has her summary ready by the 21st November. The tool is ready by November the
And
22nd.
so I guess the other thing I would suggest is that so that people have it all one package, that I'll take your narrative and I'll build that as kind of page one of the tool so that people don't need to be looking, how's that sound? I think that's pretty easy to do. So by the 21st, if you could just have me those questions and I'll have a place to drop them in. Okay.
And the reason why I ask for a little bit longer time, I am taking a couple of days off in between, and I do not want to be working on this, why I am taking some time off.
Nancy?
So am I hearing that Denise will not fill out the tool?
No, she always fills out the tool.
Okay.
She always does a self-evaluation.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think we ought to keep that consistent as well.
Thank you,
I
good.
think that was a real key component that we need to have her self-evaluation as well. Do we still want to continue with that?
And I did that at the same time you did it, I believe. So
Yeah,
that then there
exactly.
was
So
that
you
all
do it in the same
comparison.
window.
Yep.
Okay,
So I was not seeing
Okay.
yours and you were not seeing mine, but it
Exactly.
did
right,
comparison.
exactly. Right. Is that okay? All right.
Everybody okay with that? Any objections? Okay, let's make it happen. Okay, it's on you, John.
Right.
Okay, appreciate your willingness to step forward and be drafted. It's good. Okay, thank you. Well, we're at Receiver Act on Council Correspondence, and I will start off. We have a card for condolence card for Jeff Parker. His father passed away.
Yeah, no, I appreciate everybody's thoughts. It was not a fun week, but it's part of life. And I just appreciate you guys giving me a little time to be out of town to deal with that. So thanks.
Well, anything anybody else has got to be cheerier. Anything? Michelle?
I wanted to thank the businesses for having trick or treat for the kids yesterday. It was a very successful event and it was a lot of fun to see the families and children.
Judith?
And same for the coffin races. Wow, they were amazing and so well attended and went off with kind of without a hitch that I know of. And just to let you know that I'm going to be attending the CML Plastic Pollution Reduction Act workshop tomorrow. So can't wait to bring you what I learned from that back. That's all I've got.
Anything else? Okay, if not, let's go to the city administrator's report.
I just have a couple, and one is the coffin races. I really want to recognize the chamber and our staff really came together, and I think it was the best organized and well-run coffin races in many years. I don't want to say the best ever because I haven't been here, but in many years we had the staff available and everybody really stepped up. And it was great to see the families, the kids, the shuttles. There were lots of things that were implemented this year that I think we can learn on. So I want to recognize everybody and the partnership that we have with the chamber to make that happen. And other than that, I don't have anything at this time. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we have two executive sessions on the agenda. Go ahead and read them, and then I would like to have a motion to go into executive session. The first, an executive session to discuss the purchase or sale of property for public purpose pursuant to section 5.1B of the Manitou Springs Home Rule Charter. Additional details are not provided as they would jeopardize potential transaction. It's two, an executive session to hold a conference with the city attorney for legal advice pursuant to section 5.1C of the Manitou Springs Home Rule Charter concerning the Manitou Springs Urban Renewal Authority tax increment financing obligations. Do you have a motion to go into executive session?
Second.
Motion to second. Okay. All in favor?
Seven to zero in favor.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I think we've probably got everybody we need. Let's go ahead and take a couple of minutes to make the necessary security arrangements and change over. We can stretch our legs for a few minutes.